What's up, everyone? We are back for episode 5 of the In Between Time podcast. Got to thank the man himself, Stu Champion, again for joining us last week. Honestly, I think we all got those kind of childish giggles and had a huge adrenaline rush just talking about Breaking Green and Gray. All the emails, all the responses we got from everybody. It was so cool to hear and read just everybody's individual kind of Breaking Green and Gray stories, favorite memories when they were younger, when they broke it, all of it. So thank you for your continued communication. Thank you for hitting us up. But now it is time for number 5, which, if I can say so, kind of feels like a real number. Feels like we really have a podcast as opposed to a hobby. But here we go. And as always, we are going to start with the best thing that happened this week. Raul, what was the best thing that happened to you this week?
Best thing this week, it came as a result of the worst thing. And the worst thing, obviously, during these times is not having internet is the worst thing. And that's exactly what happened. Our internet went down for a whole day. The craziest part about that was, for some reason, my laptop was the only one that was able to hook up. So, which made that day worse because I was actually able to go into work. So I couldn't use the internet down as being an excuse to miss work. So I was working the whole day, but it was the only device hooked up to the internet. But that resulted in the best thing, which was I was able to figure everything out and fix it so that we shouldn't have that problem going forward. So best thing that happened to me this week, was able to fix my internet, and hopefully we won't have that happen anymore.
Hopefully we won't have that happen anymore. Raul's new podcast coming out this weekend. Few questions, Raul. Was everybody in your house jealous that you still had the internet? Did the lack of internet prevent you from doing anything you wanted to do? And how long were you on the phone with Spectrum before they were able to actually help you in a way that was productive and get the internet back up and running?
I don't think the nice thing about today's day and age is everyone has a mobile hotspot. So, while the internet was down for everyone, my sister's also working from home. She was able to use her mobile hotspot, so she didn't miss it that much. But, it was a struggle for a bit, but nothing too serious. I wasn't on this phone with Spectrum for too long. And honestly, whenever I call any telemarketer, I always do my best to be super nice to them because those people get a beating. You know what I'm saying? It's like that person on the earpiece had nothing to do with your problem. Their job is to try to help you. And some of them, yes, could be frustrating. But I always try to be super nice. Maybe on the phone with them for 30, 40 minutes. I will say this. The problem was our wireless router. And the guy was I was like, obviously, in today's day, we need the internet. What's the fastest you could get a router to us? He's like, well, it'll take about 2 weeks to mail. Or you could go pick it up in one of our stores right now. It just blew my mind why he didn't lead with, go pick it up in the store tonight. It made no sense. But in all seriousness, it took maybe about 2 hours for me to figure out the problem and get it resolved. But the best part was my dad, who's found out the internet existed 3 years ago. He shows up from work and everything's off the internet. Our TV, everything runs off the internet, and he couldn't use the TV, and he told me what's happening. And I'm like, oh, just because my sister's picking up the part, she'll be back in 20 minutes or so. 10 minutes after that, he comes up to me. He's like, where's your sister? We need the internet now. So it's kind of funny how a person that never used the internet is now has to have it, and it's a necessity, and it truly is a necessity. So yeah, it wasn't too bad, but definitely avoided a huge problem.
Yeah. First of all, anytime I'm on the phone with a telemarketer or a customer service representative, I always try to preface anything I'm going to say and start with, listen, I understand that I am taking out my anger on the wrong person, and I know that this is not your fault, and I apologize for my tone for the entirety of the rest of the conversation. And then there's generally a big, however,
yeah,
and then I maybe or likely lose my cool. I'd also imagine that in this sort of quarantine era where Zoom and Google Hangouts sort of runs the world, lack of internet might lead to some international catastrophes. So I feel for you, Raul, but I'm glad that you got it back up and running. Xander, what was the best thing that happened to you this week, buddy?
Zach, thank you so much for asking. I was a little bit nervous initially I thought maybe, wow, I don't know if I did something that was so cool. I was worried that I wouldn't have something that was good enough to be the best thing that happened to me this week. And then Raul just said the best thing that happened to him was losing the internet. So I think the bar was set pretty low for me. For me this week, I've been playing a lot of MLB The Show, and I just collected the Nolan Arenado card, which gave me the Colorado Rockies. I've now collected all of the NL West and all of the NL Central. I'm Scherzer and DeGrom away from collecting the NL East. Once I do that, I get that sick Gary Sheffield card. Then I'll start to work on the AL. And then hopefully I can get that Mickey Mantle card.
So there are moments in a boy's life that I think mothers just put in to baby books or mental baby books. You sort of have your first steps, your kindergarten graduation. In your case, probably your bar mitzvah. Where do you think getting Nolan Arenado in MLB The Show ranked as far as proud of her son moments for your mother, Xander?
Zach, it's funny you should ask. My mother is not so pleased that I'm playing the game. And it's not because of what you might think, that I'm an adult and I shouldn't be spending conservatively 12, more liberally 20 hours a day playing a video game. Her concern is video games are supposed to be fun, and I am one more strikeout away from launching the controller through the screen. So after she's heard me scream at the television for, I don't know, the 200th time, she was like, maybe you shouldn't be playing this game, but I don't know if that's going to stop me. We love the pain, Zach. We love the pain.
Oh, masochistic PlayStation is like the newest fad during the quarantine. I actually have a bit of a different best thing of my week. These guys are talking about the internet and technology. I don't know if you guys have been checking or whatever. Probably haven't, because why would you? But the weather up here has actually gotten really, really, really nice. And I took a kayak out on the lake the other day for the first time. I had the Bluetooth speaker, the waterproof speaker in the boat with me, kind of just chilling, enjoying the environment, the weather, the ambiance. It was pretty incredible. I was rocking Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers radio on Spotify. I was running down a dream all day, guys. Are you, Raul, have you heard of Tom Petty? Do you know that he's a musician? Have you listened to his stuff? What's your relationship like with the Heartbreakers?
Where I'm from, Heartbreakers are just a gang. So I don't like to affiliate with any Heartbreakers. I'm going to go ahead and say that on the radio, on live right now. But Tom Petty, I have no idea who that is.
Xander, how about you? Tom Petty guy?
I'm kind of lost on the gang comment. That kind of shook me up, so I don't even know if I can answer. Now I don't want to get affiliated by saying that I was initially a Tom Petty guy. I did see, and Raul, please have my back and say I was like under duress when I made this claim, but I did see Tom Petty perform at the Super Bowl. Giants-Pats won the Tyree catch. I was there, 50-yard line, 5th grade. One of the coolest weekends of my life. Tom Petty was kind of the cherry on top of that very exciting game.
And I saw Tom Petty at the Super Bowl of upstate New York music venues, Saratoga Performing Arts Center, more commonly known as SPAC, when I was a senior B. And he absolutely crushed it. Certainly a fond memory of mine from when I was a camper. All right. I think that's a good place to move on to our next segment. It's, of course, the fan response of the week. And Raul, who is our sponsor of our fan response of the week this time, buddy?
All right, guys. Today, this fan response of the week is brought to you by Axe Deodorant. If you think jumping in the lake is just as good as taking a shower before a social, why not mask that waterfront smell and cover your whole body with Axe? It's a sure way to make you smell like you're still at home in Long Island and likely repel all the girls away from you, so you have a built-in excuse to keep eating Lay's potato chips and talking to your favorite counselor. Do you care if it makes your bunk uninhabitable? Because we certainly don't. Axe Deodorant, providing irrational confidence to 13-year-olds since 1983.
And, of course, like to take this moment to remind our viewers that this copyrighted podcast is presented by the authority of Brant Laker Camp and may not be reproduced or retransmitted in any form. And the accounts and descriptions of this podcast may not be disseminated without the express written consent of the aforementioned Brant Laker Camp. All right, folks. Got a lot of really, really nice emails. I think people were excited to listen to Stu speak, and a lot of people had some nice things to say. Got a great email from Julius Josephson, a very nice email from Sam Spitz, and a really, really nice email from Nick Maskey, who I hope we can have on the podcast sometime soon. But the fan response of the week comes this week from Michael Green. Michael says, "Hi, guys. Loving the podcast so far. Listening has been a highlight of my quarantine for sure. It was awesome to hear Stu Champ's voice for the first time in a really long time. Can't forget about Jeffrey Azerno's wicked 2015 tumble on center basketball court on his way to break the clubhouse. Such a funny moment in the heat of intensity. Above all else, you guys must get Luis on the show. Would be insane. Best wishes and miss you guys, Michael." Zach, what do you think? Is there any shot we're going to get Luis on the podcast?
Short answer, no. Long answer, if we tell him it'll get him, 100 more Twitter followers, there's a shot. No, he's doing big things now. I talk to Luis all the time. I actually played him in FIFA today. He won 2 games. I won 1. Wasn't a great showing for Team Cohen. But we'd love to have Luis on the pod. Raul, you think we can get him on the pod?
I just think like he might have a hard time finding the pod. I don't know if he can make it.
Might get lost in the woods. All right, that's pretty good. All right, guys. So moving on. Last week we shared some of our favorite green and gray break and build-up memories with Stu, and it felt like a pretty big topic, and we weren't really sure how we could follow it up. But, in sort of sequencing out how green and gray happens, once the break occurs and everybody's at the dining room, the next thing that sort of tends to transpire is the choosing of the green and gray captain. So we figured this week we could talk about some special green and gray captains from our time at camp, kind of our experience being captains, what makes a great green and gray captain, and the like. And in figuring out our guest for this week, we didn't think there was anyone better than probably the most memorable and successful captain in recent years. And it probably helped tip the balance that he was a green too, just to, keep things even here. But we are super, super excited and stoked, brah, for having our buddy Zach Wehmeyer join us on the In Between Time podcast. Welcome to the show, Zach.
Oh, yeah, a little technical difficulties there. But hey, no, thank you guys so much for having me. I'm super stoked to be here. I'm happy. I'm always happy to be the obligatory green punching bag in these meetings. But also, for me, it feels good. It feels like being back on TYs for a morning meeting. We just need like Evan and Tom looking up ESPN stats in the corner, and somebody's got to go wake up David Orion, and we're off to the races, man. So it's all good. Happy to be here, guys.
And an English to Brunt translator. What, Zach? You've been at camp for a long time. It's coming close to not quite 10, but getting up there 10 years now. But there are a lot of alumni on the show who listen, maybe haven't been at camp in a long time. So give us sort of the Zach Wehmeyer backstory, how you got to camp, what you've been doing since you've been there. 2 or 3 sentences, go for it.
Yeah, man, totally. Well, I'm from Missouri, so we don't really do sleepaway camps very much. So I really just found Brant Lake kind of by coincidence. I have an older brother. He was a counselor. He found it before me and was a counselor on Inner Row in 2010 with Jasper and the legend Gabe Sokoloff and all those guys. And he told me a bunch of stories and was like, man, you got to check this place out. So my first summer was 2013, and I've just been coming back ever since, man. There's no place I'd rather be in the summers for sure.
So that's really nice of you to say that. That's awesome. He really means it. Jokes aside, I want to know from you, just because you sort of similar to Raul had a different kind of introduction to green and gray. I guess your first summer was 2013, and then you were captain 2 years later. And I guess my first question is, when you're going to be, or there's a chance you might be counselor captain, the kids all talk about it. You kind of think, well, maybe there's a chance, I'm not sure. And then, Richie's on the podium in 2015, senior camp, captain of the green team. Zach Wehmeyer, and immediately, obviously, that adrenaline hits. What was that feeling like for you, man?
Oh man, it's like you're just walking down the street and then somebody like beams a spotlight right on you. Because obviously leading up to that, people sort of like there's rumors going around, and if the kids think you're the guy, they'll like start nudging you, in the in between times and stuff, and at the league's games, they'll be like, hey, are you ready for green and gray? Like you're gonna be captain, you're gonna be captain. Meanwhile, they're saying that to like 15 other people because everybody's got to get their guess in for who's the guy. But
and get their dibs in on captain shirts too, right?
Yeah, no doubt. You're gonna have like 50 sophomores following you around. But like everybody sort of the buzz kind of starts. But I think there's like this feeling that people have that you get told that you're gonna be captain in advance. Like I've definitely been told before, like, oh, if you're captain, they'll tell you. And my personal experience, I can't speak for anybody else, is that I had no idea up until the moment that Richie's standing up there and is like, boom. And then all of a sudden your like whole world explodes, which is both really awesome and very, very daunting.
So Raul, I'm curious. I want to start with you just because, Xander, in my experience, again, having both been campers first and seen more of it or whatever is a little bit different, but I'm curious what it was like for you. Did you sort of have any heads up that you were going to be captain the first time? Did anyone give you an inclination, or was it sort of just like Richie announced it and there you go, up those stairs and figure it out?
I mean, I really had no idea. It was 2010, I want to say. 2010 sounds right. And I don't know if you guys know this, but it wasn't until my 5th year at Brant Lake that I learned how to speak. So that's why it was really like shocking to me. And it was only my 2nd summer at Brant Lake, So it was kind of, I guess they didn't have anybody else. And if you want to get technical, I technically wasn't a captain. I was a lieutenant. I do remember that. So I guess there wasn't a lot to pick from that year, but you definitely didn't. I had no idea. And again, being my 2nd summer, only having one green and gray experience prior to it, I still didn't have any idea what I was going to get myself into, and being called and kind of putting myself in that position, it was terrifying, and like having to speak in front of so many people. I definitely misspoke in all those meetings, but I definitely still remember a couple of the speeches that I believe, Zach, you were a captain alongside me, and I remember some of your speeches in that moment. But yeah, I had no idea, and it was terrifying.
Yeah, we were definitely captain together that year. It was a lot of fun. It unfortunately didn't go as well as we would have hoped, but certainly an experience unto itself. Xander, I'm curious now. Let's move on, I guess, to the camper captain side of this. So you're a senior C, and you sort of have a feel that like this might be a thing that might happen. But if I remember your group reasonably well, there weren't like obvious choices. I guess some years there are 2 or 3 people who are just like, these are the guys. And I think in your year for the gray team, there were like 4 or 5 people that, again, to reference what Wehmeyer was just saying, through the rumor mill, everybody was sort of talking about, oh, these guys might be captain. It might be this person. It might be that person. What was that feeling like when you left the gray team was always in the clubhouse, right? First. So when you leave the clubhouse and you go to the bell tower and you're sort of sitting there and you're waiting, what was that like for you?
Yeah, I knew I had a shot. You're right. There were definitely a bunch of guys who could have been captain. It ended up being me and Swirls, me and Jake Bernstein, but there were guys who had been there a while and who were big time athletes. Ben Lee was, if not the best basketball player in camp, number 2 or 1A, 1B with Goldie. And so he'd obviously been seen a lot. And he was always just a winner. So I figured if he were captain, I thought we stood a good shot at winning. I thought we had enough good choices that I felt confident that year. But it's super nerve-wracking sitting out by the bell tower. And don't let anyone tell you differently. Even though I was totally confident in the group of guys, I mean, this is something that you've seen for a really long time. You've been watching captains for 7, 8 years. So that's something that you want. And it's something that I definitely wanted. And I was definitely really, really, really nervous. I remember they bring back the first group, and then there are 4 or 5 sitting there. It must have been me, Swirls, Elon, Ben Lee, and maybe Alex Flynn or something like that. And I remember we came back after that, and before they announced who it was, we're standing outside, and I think it was Justin Tao pointed at me. He's like, "You got it." I was like, "Oh, that's crazy!" And then you're immediately thrown into the fire. You have to speak. So it goes from you're pretty anxious, and now you have to speak in front of everyone and really watch your language, because that's if that's not the number one concern of what's going on. I mean, you're 15 years old, you're talking exclusively with your friends, and now you're speaking in front of the entire camp. That's a huge shift. So that I remember those were kind of the thoughts in my head right after, during the vote and right after the vote.
Yeah, I had a similar experience. As a camper, and it's just so cool how the traditions are the same. And it was 10 years apart, 9 years apart, but you go to the clubhouse because that's where the gray team meets, and the green team meets in the grandstand on the first day, and that's just obvious, and that's what happens. And you ask anyone who's been at camp in the last 25 years, and they could tell you the same thing, which is so cool to me. But anyway, so we go out to the bell tower, and I'd been kind of injured that summer. I hadn't really been able to participate in anything. And look, if I'm being honest, I really wanted to be captain. It was something that was really cool and important to me, and I'd looked up to senior C's the whole time I was at camp. And it was something I really wanted. And I guess similar to you, Xander, I was sort of in the running, and there were other people that could have gotten it. And I remember being super, super nervous. And then, you come back in, and they announce who it is. And then all of a sudden, again, Xander, you nailed it, right? It's I'm nervous about being captain. And okay, now I'm captain, and I better say something somewhat intelligent, and I better not curse in front of all these kids. And I, now, okay, all right, I'm 30, when I'm 32 years old, I could probably control my language a little bit. 15, with the biggest adrenaline rush I've ever had in my entire life, I don't know, I wouldn't have bet on me. And I don't even remember a word I said. Hopefully it was in English. Hopefully it made sense. I'm sure it wasn't great, but it was such a shift in emotion so quickly. I remember being, counselor captain, and sort of thinking similar shift of emotions. I mean, Zach, I'm curious what your opinion is. You're, in your mind that summer, yeah, I'd like to do this. This would be really, really, really cool. Okay, everyone thinks I'm going to be captain. Great, fine, awesome. To all of a sudden, now I'm captain, and everybody's looking at me. And it's not just, oh, it'd be cool if you're captain. It's you better be a good captain, because this means so much to us. What was that shift of emotions like for you? How did you get from A to B? Did that happen quickly? Or were you nervous? What was that like?
Oh, man, I was so nervous. And I think it's I like that Xander brought that piece in, because I think that there's because of the legendary status of green and gray, there's this sort of this ominous persona around people who fill that function. And, I think it's important to acknowledge in that moment, you're just entire world is blown apart. And, for me, I can only speak from my own personal experience, but at that moment, you're not just feeling the weight of all of these people who are now literally looking up at you. You're standing on the balcony, and they're literally, their eyes are up at you. But you're right across from the junior clubhouse, and you've spent countless nights in there at that point, with all of the banners on the walls and people counting the streaks and, naming the years, especially if you're Sam Spitz. And it's there's this sort of presence that is palpable, where you're it's insane almost to say that for 4 days, people all over the world are watching that tiny plot of land. But it's very true when you hear stories from people who are monitoring the Twitter feed, that for those 4 days, there are people who are doing really big real world things that are stopping what they're doing to call in and find out what's going on. And you're now basically the mantle bearer for that entire responsibility, which is incredible. I mean, it's maybe the best feeling I've ever had in my life. And simultaneously, that is quite a weight to try to lift, man. It's intense. It's amazing, but it's intense.
100%. I've never felt more, that's right, responsibility for something that was so important to more people than being gray captain. I mean, captain in general. I mean, I happen to be gray, but it doesn't matter green versus gray. You just sort of feel that pressure, I guess. I mean, Raul, I know you were, we'll call you captain, even though it was lieutenant. It said captain on the shirt, right? Did you feel the same pressure in the juniors? Did you sort of see, when you got to senior camp, a difference in burden on senior camp captains? What was that kind of the difference? What was that experience like for you?
I didn't feel it right away because I didn't know what it was or what I was getting myself into. And that's just the genuine response. I had no idea what it was going to be like. There was nothing to feel the pressure of for me. But then once you get in it, and then kid after kid, day after day, they come up to you and, what's the score? What's the score? You got to make this team. You got to work with this. And I'm just like, what is happening? It was for me. Honestly, I'm actually happy that it happened because I think it did help me grow and develop. It definitely sped up my ability to talk to in front of people and to very important people. But yeah, it's I didn't know what I was getting myself into, and and again, being captain alongside you, hearing you speak in front of this group of people, and you could tell you've done it before and you've been there, you know what this experience is all about. And then being asked to follow you, I was just like, I don't know what I'm doing here, but it was again, it was definitely an experience, and I only wish that I would have been able to experience it 4 years, 5 years into my Brant Lake life, because then I truly would have been able to give it more, because I would have known what that moment was all about. So a little bit premature, but all in all, still a very positive experience for me.
Xander, did you feel more pressure? Tough question. I feel like you're the guy. Did you feel more pressure as a camper captain or as a counselor captain?
It's a great question, Zach. Pressure. That's interesting. Because you feel, I think, more pressure to win, because that's the year you're always going to look back at, is your senior C year. You could be like, well, I won my C year. That's like a feather in your cap that you'll always have and something that can never be taken away from you. But there's certainly, it's not even close, more responsibility when you're a counselor captain. So, the pressure is not, what can I do for myself? Oh, can I look back and say I won that senior C year? You have the responsibility aspect of it, and also the pressure of those kids who were senior Cs that year, which might be more important, especially when, I'd been a counselor because I was counselor captain in 2018. So I had been a counselor with those kids for 2017 and 2018. So that was my second year with, those group of guys. So you feel a lot of responsibility and a lot of pressure to perform for them and so that they can, they can win. So I think pressure probably as a camper captain, but responsibility counselor captain it's not even close. I don't think I've had a meal during Green and Gray since I've been a counselor.
Yeah, it's like cough drops and Jolly Ranchers and coffee, and that's about it. Maybe some water if you're playing an event. You hit on a really interesting point, and I do want to talk about it because I think that the common perception of being a counselor captain, and I do want to talk about being a camper captain a little bit more, but is that you're responsible for making these huge speeches. Like you get up there and make these massive speeches and everybody goes nuts and okay, well now the meeting's over. Like way more of being counselor captain is sort of strategizing and planning and assigning and doing all these things. And I think the period that sort of embodies that more than any other one is sort of period 6, like the wacky period in senior camp. So I'm curious, Zach, like how much time goes into planning out these periods? How much effort? How much more of the job would you say is that as opposed to get up on the stage in the clubhouse and make a speech in front of all these kids?
Yeah, man, no, that's a great question. It's actually something that I feel like I've talked to a lot of people about the last couple of years too, because there's a lot of fear around doing that. I think like the idea of being in front of all those people and having to talk. And you've got people who are otherwise unbelievable captains that sort of gauge themselves by that yardstick of like how memorable was my speech. And I think that's really a disservice to what it means to be a captain during Green and Gray, because like those speeches are going to cumulatively make up maybe possibly 20 minutes of the 4 days that you're doing stuff versus like the amount of planning that goes into the wacky period. I can tell you like it's multiple hours to get your first draft, and then you have to like go consult people, and then you come back, and then you get your second draft, and then you consult people, and you come back, you get your third draft, you think you've got it all figured out, and then there's like the senior C's are like, actually no, we want to make these changes, and you're like, okay, well, I'm going to do this. Like it pales in comparison. And I think that like if you're smart about how you go about it, you know, you see the tools that you have in place, and you know the people who need to be in front of everyone and who need to talk, and like who want that opportunity, who want that moment, that like it's almost like you have the ability to put them in that place at a moment in time that's defining for them, and that's going to be best for everybody. So I think it's really like a balance of, if you're strategic about how you do it, it's almost like you're not always the one talking. You're finding the best person to talk in that scenario, and then putting that person and letting them have their moment. And that's really, I think, what captain is being about across all 4 days, is like finding the way to make it so that everybody gets to have their moment. And if you can do that, whether, you know, you get to ring the bell in the end or not, is like, that is the most rewarding experience of the entire thing.
I agree. I will say, you know, having been on both sides of it, certainly more rewarding if you do ring the bell in the end. But it's an awful transition, because we just talked about how they're not as important. But I'm curious, because I think a lot of people are probably curious about this. Start with Raul, honestly, just because of, you know, everything you said about public speaking, and I'm curious about the speeches, right? So, what's your feeling? You know, let's throw out the first day, because that one you're obviously got the nerves, the adrenaline, all of that. So second morning, green and gray, the score might as well be tied, because it's plus or minus a couple points, reasonably close, and you're getting up and you've got to make a speech in front of the entire team. Are you planning it in advance? Are you nervous? Are you excited? What's going through your head, and how much prep work goes into those speeches?
Honestly, I can tell you that I didn't prep, and the reason I didn't prep is because I was so terrified of the moment. It ate me up. I've never been the kind to prep anyways when I'm speaking in public. I kind of just like to wing it. That's kind of been one of my strengths as I've, you know, gotten more comfortable with public speaking. I'm decent at winging it. I will say that, you know, again, following you was probably the hardest thing that could have happened that summer. So I remember trying to amp up my energy. Like, I would see you and I would think, okay, that's what I have to do. Like, I see you getting amped and I see you getting everybody involved, and I'm like, that's what I have to do. And, you know, obviously I don't think I did a very good job of it, but if you're an outsider looking in, that's the example that's been set. You know, I'm looking at this guy who's done this forever and is super passionate about this, and I have to try to match it. And I remember misspeaking a lot during those times, and like during those speeches. I remember one moment specifically where you try to set me up. It was after the Counselor soccer game. It's like one of the two events that I got to play in, and I did a decent job. And you know, Luis, he was a green, and he was playing on that team as well. He's a good player, and all I am is I'm just tenacious and quick as a defender, and I did a pretty decent job of shutting him down that game. And you put the ball on the tee for me. You're like, this guy right here, he locked up Luis. We ended up winning that game, and then I think I got on there and I just butchered it. You know, so I don't know, man. I think it was a little early on for me, but I definitely loved it, and had a lot of fun doing it. Yeah.
Xander, what about you? Particularly when you were camper captain. I mean, how much? Because as a camper captain, you don't necessarily have the perspective or the influence necessarily on the planning and the lineup making and the strategy and all of it. So, you know, partially perception, partially reality. You know, those speeches are certainly important. And, you know, you've kind of been looking forward to that pedestal your whole time in camp. So, you know, what were the emotions going into make the speeches? And how were they different when they were full camp versus just senior camp?
That's a good question. You're going to feel, you know, I tend not to script out the thoughts that I have, and I didn't then. And you're going to feel nerves. You're going to feel a little pressure. I mean, that's that's kind of inherent. I mean, I know people, even now, you get a little bit nervous when you're speaking in front of large groups. That's just kind of the way it goes. Being a camper captain was certainly a lot more fun because, I mean, that's the ideal. It was like probably the most fun 4 days I've ever had at camp. I mean, you're the local celebrity. You're the boss. It was really, really cool. You're going to feel pressure. You're going to feel nerves. But I think what I learned from that was to not let, and I think this is kind of applicable to all of Green and Gray because there are going to be games and people are going to watch you. Don't let the pressure of the moment get in the way of the pleasure of the moment. And like in that, I mean, like, yeah, like you're going to feel nervous. That's kind of the nature of the beast. But don't let that distract you from how much fun you're having in this moment, how awesome this is. You're going to get nervous. I mean, pro athletes get nervous in big games, but hey, they're like playing in front of all these people and it's really exciting. And for 4 days, you get to be the pro athlete of Brant Lake Camp. And then in terms of senior camp versus the rest of camp, I can't answer that. There's no way I can answer that. I don't know who's listening.
Hold on, we know who's listening based on the week last week. So I appreciate you not diving off that diving board if you're not comfortable doing it. But I don't know. I think as a camper captain, I think that you sort of have more of a role in the senior camp meetings. I think mathematically for sure, you're 1 out of 3 as opposed to 1 out of 6 or whatever the number is. But I think I was always also just more comfortable. Mm-hmm. I was speaking in front of a room of my peers as opposed to like a massive room. And I don't think it was the number. It was more like the unknown. Like I knew I could connect with the senior Bs. I knew I was making eye contact with senior As whose name I knew. And it just felt kind of more powerful to me. I don't know, but as a counselor captain, I love those. I love those full camp meetings, man. Those are so much fun for me. I never scripted anything. Honestly, I think I had an idea in my mind of like things maybe I wanted to say, but you kind of just let adrenaline take over and you hope you don't say something stupid. Honestly, that was sort of my modus operandi or whatever. I don't know, Zach. I mean, you're probably more eloquent than either of the three of us, honestly. So I feel like you probably gave yourself a little more leeway. But did you write stuff down? Did you have an idea of what you wanted to say?
Oh man, so I think I'm going to be the dissenting voice here, and I would say that I always thought through what I wanted to say. But to be fair, the reasoning behind that was that like I never wanted to get in a moment where the adrenaline was so deep that I couldn't pull myself out and I lost my train of thought. The last thing you want when you're trying to pump people up is to have this awkward pause that, ends your cascade that you're trying to get them to sort of feel this way about something. So I always thought through, like, what would I say if I was trying to say it right now? And then in the moment, it never once went the way that I planned it, ever. Or I ever even said any of the things that I was going to plan. It was more like I knew what feeling I was trying to evoke, like, because I had done it for myself. And then because I knew that in the moment when, like, I couldn't think straight anymore, like, that was just what came out instead. So that was sort of my experience with it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's an interesting point because I mean it kind of comes down to what's your goal with the speech? Are you trying to get your audience to think a certain way, or are you trying to elicit like an emotional response? Because if you want them to think a certain way, then what you're saying is really, really important, and you should probably think out like how you want to get that point across. But if you're trying to like elicit an emotional response, honestly, more of it is like the musicality of what you're saying and like how you can like rise and fall and get other people involved and get people to respond emotionally. I mean, that's the way to do it. I mean, I remember when I was a camper, I mean, a lot of people probably think that when people quietly go like, G, oh, hey, why? That started with me, but I heard Zach do that. And, it gets to the point where you have no idea what I'm saying because everyone else around you is screaming. But, like, the kind of musicality of it, the fact that it gets louder, it gets you going. It gets me going when I'm speaking. I mean, that's kind of the way it goes.
Yeah, and to sort of maybe close we're on a good train of thought. I just have so many more questions, so we just got to move on. But that was literally just made that up on the spot one morning when we were in the clubhouse during Green and Gray. As far as like writing things down, it was just like, oh, this would be kind of cool. Let's just like do this, and then I'll just yell a lot, and then everybody will go nuts. But I'm curious, Zach. You know, you're 2 years, and Raul, then we'll go to you, and then Xander. I'm curious if there was someone in, I guess, Zach, you only had the 1 year, maybe. I don't know how many years you had at Green and Gray before you were captain, but was there someone that you saw, either Green or Gray, that you were sort of like, wow, that's really cool? Like that's someone that like, if I'm ever captain, I'm taking some things from that person because he or she, like the way that they carry themselves, like that's what a captain should be.
Yeah, man, no, it's an interesting question, especially from the context for where I'm coming from, having, not been at camp as a camper. And so in 2015, I had only seen Green and Gray in 2013 because I left early the next year. I think when I think about that, like people who come to my mind, like Ronan and Robbie Patterson and like those guys, especially with how they interacted with the really young kids who are like maybe experiencing their first or second Green and Gray and how to deal with that intensity at like an age appropriate level. I think those guys were a huge model for me of like, what do I want to embody for these guys who are like getting into this, but need a little bit of scaffolding around it for like what's going to be, the level of competition we want for them. But honestly, I stepped into a situation where when I was in senior camp, it was like Gray dominated in terms of counselors. You had Luis, who was like running senior camp at that time, and he was the guy for Green. It was like Luis. He's got the speeches, like he was unbelievable, but he's been purple for a while at this point.
Purplish.
Purplish.
Purple in quotes.
he wears the shirt, not the spirit. But so for me, honestly, I can't believe I'm going to admit this with other people able to listen, but a lot of what I sort of tried to embody was I took from things that I knew was really important for Gray, and like stories that Gray is talking about where like things that they remember and like it's a feeling almost, but like that's what you're trying to emulate really, is like that feeling of what it means to be a part of that team. And to be fair, maybe I'm biased too, because like a lot of my friends from camp are Gray, and so like maybe I have more of that crossover than the average person. But I think you can find things on both sides of the aisle that you really want to bring to that position. And I learned a lot from, hearing stories of like the guys who came before me, like Yuko and like Xander, like listening to, what people had to say about those leadership instances. Like I tried to draw from all of that.
Yeah, I think like the beauty of it, Zach, and like I have the same. Like I definitely took things from people who were Green also, and Xander, I'll get to you in a sec. But I think the beauty of it is that you have such close friends on the other team. That's like, it's like the cheesy throwaway line, but it's true. Like the best part of it is that you've got guys on both sides that are like very, very close friends, and you get to like go at each other's throats for 4 days and be best friends when it's over. Yeah, Xander, go ahead.
Yeah, that's the thing. So Zach saying he took some stuff from his Gray friends. I got to say, when I was growing up, I think I was 1-4 by my senior B year. We lost all the time, and what I kind of noticed was that Green always seemed to be having more fun. And so, like, that's when I was a counselor, that was kind of something that I wanted to instill in people who are watching. And when we started to call ourselves the fun team was because, like, it seemed like every year, whichever team was having more fun was the team that was winning. I'm not sure if it was like, oh, we're winning, we're having more fun. I thought maybe, if we start having more fun, then we'll start winning. Because I couldn't change the result of who was winning. I could definitely change the result of who was having more fun. So...
Yeah,
like
Raul.
in 2010.
Sorry.
Like 2010, they had the FIFA song, the World Cup song,
Yeah, the Shakira song. Yeah.
The whole time, I was just like, God, man, how are these guys having so much fun? We're losing by so much. Terrible.
Yeah, Raul, it wasn't a great year for us as captains, was it? But
No.
I'm curious, like, was there somebody, even after you were a captain, that you sort of looked and you were like, whoa, like that guy, or like, sure, she's doing a really good job. And I think, Wehmeyer, I think your point is about the younger kids is so accurate and important. Sorry, Raul, I didn't mean to cut you off, but I'm curious, to go back to you when you were captain with the juniors, and I think that, like, a great speech for a group of 14-year-olds, like, isn't a great speech for a group of 10-year-olds. Like, the buttons are different, right? The motivating factors are just different. What inspires an 11-year-old to, like, play his heart out is a little bit different than maybe what inspires a 15-year-old. So, like, Raul, were there other soft junior captains that you saw even after your time as captain where you were like, whoa, like, she's nailing it. Like, he is absolutely nailing it.
Yeah, I'm going to answer this question honestly. Guys, you guys know I struggle with names. So this is just an unfair question. So I got to be honest. After I came into senior camp, I kind of lost a lot of memories from my junior hill years. I can't. You're asking me. It's just everyone. It's just Timmy. I don't know. I can't think of any names. I just see like you guys having a good time, like Wehmeyer. You guys are the ones that come to mind, and just seeing you guys. Not apart from the speeches, just seeing you guys when you coached. That was what did it for me. That's what kind of helped me realize, like, this is green and gray. Seeing you guys work with the kids. I remember in that summer, Zach, who I really just spent days off with, but I was very standoffish at the time. He came down to Junior Hill and coached up a basketball game with some junior kids and killed it. He was able to connect with those kids immediately, and I'm like, what's going on here? Every time I see Wehmeyer coaching as a captain, he's just so upbeat, so passionate. It's kind of like annoying sometimes because I'm like, why is this guy so like upbeat right now in this pressure cooker of a moment? He's like, great job, guys. Yeah, we're killing it. Yeah. A lot of repetition with Wehmeyer. And then Xander's just like that guy who's like, he's just going to be in your face, but at the same time be very clever about the way or what he's saying or what the cheer is. So that's more of what I took from. It's not so much the speeches or anything like that, but seeing everybody kind of coach and be a part of the moment.
Yeah, for me, they were just like the obvious. You remember camper captains pretty well. You remember who they are. But, like, if we're being honest, like, I think the counselor captains, just because they have a bigger role, you kind of maybe remember them a bit more vividly. For me, like, easily for Gray, it was Jacob and Asa Fry. Those were, like, the guys, right? Like, if there was somebody, that you looked to was like, oh, my goodness, like those two are, like, they're crazy and they, like, bleed gray and the whole thing. People, like, know who they are in camp now, and they haven't been in camp in, I couldn't even tell you how many years. And for Green, like, honestly, it was Luis. Luis was incredible, man. He was so passionate. And, and I'm always amazed. I say this all the time. I'm always amazed by the people that kind of came to camp later. So, again, me and Xander were Gray when we were 8 years old. There was never a choice. Like, when you're 15, you're always going to be all in, completely into it, head over heels, just like this is the most important thing in the world. But I'm always amazed by the people that kind of come to Green and Gray as counselors from, different place in the world, having a ton of other experiences of things that were incredibly important to them. And they find the same, if not more passion for it as all the ex-campers do. So Luis for sure stands out for me. And Wehmeyer, it's a similar story, right? His brother, let's look, to spill family secrets here. His brother was a Gray. So, like, he was shocked about even being on the Green team. And all of a sudden, like, this guy is like the icon for the Green team at Brant Lake. That's pretty cool to get to a level like that. And I definitely think you can steal things from people across other teams. I think you just admire people who are inspirational to you. You know what I mean? So, I don't know. For me, it was always, the Fries for sure for Gray, those were the guys. Jacob and Asa, they were nutcases, but they were smart. Jacob's the mayor of Minneapolis, so obviously he was pretty eloquent. But I always looked up to those guys, and I always thought if I'm ever lucky enough to be captain, I hope I'm something like those guys, and that was sort of the inspiration for me. Yeah, Zach, sorry, I know you wanted to jump in a while ago.
Oh, no, it's okay. I just wanted to ask a clarifying question because I've wondered about this, I think, since 2013. But did Luis really drink green paint when he won as a captain? Like, there's a story.
I think it was in a meeting. Hopefully someone who was there. I wasn't there, obviously, but someone who
Did
was
run
there.
a toxicology report?
I think he dumped a bucket of green paint over his head and drank some of it in a meeting. I'm pretty sure that's a true story. I mean, Asa used to walk around with like the Tarzan gray shirt with the rip in it. It was hard to look at those guys and not kind of be inspired, you know? I mean, Xander, who for you as like a camper captain? Do you remember a specific camper captain that you were like, man, like that's the guy. Like if I'm lucky enough to be in his shoes, I want to kind of emulate that guy. Was there anyone?
The one year when in 2007, I remember it was Linnell and Bryce.
Yeah,
I mean, that was 2007, and I still remember their names. So I think that kind of answers your question.
Yeah, fair enough. I was lucky enough to be captain that year too, and I didn't know them as well. I mean, I knew who they were. I knew them. I knew they're Brant Laker, so we all kind of know each other a little bit. But then, yeah, they were incredible, and I remember I'll give them a shout out because we all kind of give them a hard time. But as far as camper captains recently, I mean, Ollie Lindenbaum for me was like as good as I could possibly remember. And I remember we had a talk with him before Green and Gray about how he was sort of like, Ollie, I think you're going to be incredible. I think you might be captain, but like this is going to go one of two ways. Make sure it goes the right way. And he knocked it out of the park, man. I mean, I remember refereeing that basketball game when it was sort of clear which way it was going to go. And just seeing him just like leave everything on the court, sliding, diving on the floor. I mean, I was crying during the game. It was so inspirational. Xander, yeah, go ahead.
Because I mean, it was a great conversation that we had with Ollie beforehand, and Ollie was, I mean, yeah, I thought you meant camper captains when I was a camper, people who I looked up to, but in terms of camper captains who I've seen, Ollie is certainly one of the best I've ever seen. And I think what you say about like having a conversation with him about how it can go one of two ways, that's not unique to the captain. That's universal for all senior Cs because every single one of them is is like a total celebrity in that world. I mean, they're the mascots and like icons of Green and Gray. So their attitude is top down, like one of the most important parts of Green and Gray. And that's so tough because their emotions are running so high and they're 15 years old. And this is something they look forward to for so long. And they have to worry about like having their games and their emotions under a microscope like they're NBA players. I mean, they don't have to deal with the media, but like people looking at them, I mean, that's like, in terms of like people looking at them, that's like one of the most important parts. So like controlling your emotions is always really impressive.
Yeah, it's just, I mean, look, not saying anything most people don't know. Most Brant Lakers aren't playing college basketball, and like some high school sports don't get spectated as much as you'd like them to. I don't know if I've ever played under as big of a microscope or as big of a spotlight as during Green and Gray, when literally everybody there cares so much about the outcome, whether they're rooting for you or against you. Yeah, Zach, sorry, if you want to jump in. I missed you before, no? All right. I guess the next question I have for everybody is like, if you have like a memory, like a fond memory or like a tough memory as a captain, like a moment where you were like, man, I really blew it, or like, wow, this is really like exactly how I envisioned this going. This is a really special moment that I will never forget for the rest of my life. And Zach, can you start us off, man?
Yeah, man. I'll try to keep it short, but I think I have a good one of each, honestly. The moment that I remember, I think there's so many that you could choose from, but the one that really stands out to me was 2018, and I was at one of the Senior A basketball games, and it was one of the X or Y games, and so you've got like a situation where you don't have the best basketball players in the age group on the floor. What you've got is a bunch of guys that like are gonna scrap and like just gonna try to show as much heart as they can, and that's sort of what I love about Green and Gray myself the most. As somebody who was like not a dominant athlete in any given sport, I appreciate when like you see a match where people just show up and it's like it's gonna be we're gonna brawl. We're just gonna brawl for this. And that game was wild because it was up in the arena and they're just going back and forth and like just firing off shots at each other. And like every time one team scores, the other team scores. And pretty soon it's like they keep tying, right? It gets towards the end, and we just keep tying. And, we start, like, bringing in this crowd. We're like, you guys got to see this game. And by the time we get to, like, the third double overtime, we've probably got 200 people in the arena. And it's like anybody's game. And it just so happens that right as the clock is running down, Zach Berkowitz gets the ball at, like, the top of the key and just fires off a last-minute three. And, I just watched this ball in slow motion sink into the basket, and the entire place went nuts. They had him up in the air on their shoulders within, like, 3 seconds of that game ending. And I remember thinking at that point in time, like, I watched what was happening on the Gray side, too, and I don't think there was anybody I could see that was, like, actually disappointed that, like, he got to be the one that made that shot, that he got to be the one that was, like, the hero on that day. And to me, that always stood out as, like, this is what we're trying to do here. Like, that's an incredible moment that I think is my favorite of any that I've seen.
I think that's a really, really great point, because this is going to sound harsh to say, but every green and gray, it's almost like there are just kids who maybe do deserve to win and don't deserve to win. I don't know. I don't want to say anyone doesn't deserve to win, but there are certainly kids who you watch and you're like, wow, that kid really, really, really deserved to win. And so, sometimes it doesn't go their way, either team. I remember, and wasn't when I was captain, but in 2016, watching the senior CA game when it already had been decided, and I'd been with those kids for a couple of years. We were watching the basketball game, and Ben Alfano, who was a really great camper and a good friend of mine when he was a camper. I was his counselor, and the game, they were outmatched and they had already lost green and gray, and that kid did not quit for a second and played a great game. And you just felt like, it's tough. It really sucks that there has to be a loser in this green and gray, because if there's one kid who really didn't deserve to lose, it was Ben Alfano. But answering Zach's question about if there's a moment you remember, it's kind of funny that, like, and maybe it's kind of messed up that, like, the one that he said was that we talked about earlier was, I remember being camper captain so clearly, and I think that was such an important moment for me, because, now I'm kind of a guy who's known in terms of green and gray throughout camp. But who knows, if I had not been camper captain at that point, would I be back for 14 summers, or would I be the guy who, like, closes every meeting? I would have just been someone who hadn't even been camper captain in his own year, and now I'm kind of someone who leads the team every year, even if I'm not captain. So I think that day, that moment was a really important one for me in terms of, like, my Brant Lake career, and also just in terms of feeling comfortable speaking in front of people, because that was, like, the first time I'd ever really done it. So
what about you, Raul? Like a fond memory as captain, like a game that happened, a moment in green and gray? What do you got for us?
I already talked about the time when I saw you come down and, like, coach up that basketball game, but another one that stood out was, it was Charlie Wilder's first year, and he came in and he was an all-around athlete, and I remember Richie talking to me about him and telling me, like, there's a lot of pressure on this kid because everyone thinks that he's going to be, like, the savior or whatever. And I remember watching him on a tennis court, and he was down and he was just beating himself up because you could tell that the pressure was getting to him at 10 years old. And, that's when I knew I had to, like, switch it up for him and just cheer for him and make it not so much about you have to win this match, but like Xander said, like, have some fun, man. And, sure enough, he turned it around and he ended up winning his tennis match. That was kind of a telling moment for me. And it was something that has helped me kind of learn what it takes to make kids successful at different ages. Now that I've become a high school basketball coach, I've learned, like, you got to work with the personalities versus necessarily knowing the X's and O's. I know how to coach each one of my girls individually, and I know enough about basketball to make them successful. But that was definitely a moment for me, seeing Charlie kind of overcome, like, a pretty bad match and starting to have some fun and win it. So that was the one for me.
Yeah, for me, there's a short one and a long one. The short one was, I remember, I think I was captain. I think I was still captain. I think it was 2007. And it was the fourth day of green and gray. And we were doing reasonably well. Like, we were in a good spot. And I got a text from Asa Fry in the morning. Because, to Xander's point, to whoever said it before, like, everybody who's not at camp is still watching. Everybody cares. Everybody knows what's going on. Everybody's clued in. And he basically, like, gifted me, like, the gray amen thing or whatever. So, I guess half of you listening know, and half of you maybe have heard it a little bit. But it's sort of like the fourth day, close the meeting, cheer. And that was, like, as proud of anything as I've ever been in my life, that I had been, like, gifted this mantle of responsibility and whatever. But I remember really, really well after our senior C basketball game, I was camper captain. We lost green and gray, but we also lost the basketball game. The basketball game didn't matter towards the final result, but the way it ended, we were up by a good amount at halftime. We kind of blew the lead, went to overtime, and we lost the game on a tip-in at the buzzer. Like, a kid backward in the shot, someone else jumped up and, like, literally tipped the ball in as the buzzer sounded. Game over, we lose. Green and gray over, we lose. Like, that's it. And I was, like, completely inconsolable, crying my eyes out at the front of the handshake line. And Ben Groveman, who is a name that if you're, 28 or older and we're an ex-camper, you know who that guy is. Absolute hero. He was senior camp captain for Gray at the time, and he had been my, like a JC in my bunk when I was in Inter-A. We had known each other for a while at that point. And he came and he kind of put his arm around me. He's like, you've got nothing to cry about. Pick your head up. You're the leader of this team. Like, act with pride, because you got no reason to feel otherwise. And I'll never forget that for the rest of my life. It was a crazy experience. And just like, I am responsible, and I can feel prideful for everybody that's standing behind me in this line, even though things didn't turn out how we wanted it to. That was for sure the most powerful moment I've ever had as captain. Yeah, Xander.
Yeah, I hope we're not running too long. Rick might have to trim out some things that might not have gone over so well. But I want to because Zach, you reminded me of two things. Number one, talking about Asa, talking about the Gray Amen thing. When I was a camper captain, I mean, it's something that I still have the opportunity to do now, which I'm totally grateful for. I remember you said to me, because we were talking about, like, before day 4, like, oh, are we going to do this? And you said, hey, man, like, you're the captain. Like, you get to decide, like, when we want to do it. So, I mean, it's something that I still get the opportunity to do now. And I think had you not said that to me, I mean, who knows if we would still be doing it. So it's something I definitely remember. And then the second part is talking about, losing. There's never been a year, I think. I mean, Richie talks about it every year. His favorite part of Green and Gray is when, the losing team kind of gets together on center basketball court and picks themselves up. There's never been a year where I've been, like, disappointed either when I was on the winning team or the losing team with kind of the response of the team that lost. And it's always been really, really impressive for me seeing the leadership in that moment, because I think that's probably the most important part of being a captain, is being able to pick your team up after they've lost. So, and I remember, we talked about Ollie, who had like probably one of the most memorable runs as a captain, even though, he didn't win that year. And, he had put so much into being a captain during the 4 days that after it had ended, he had been, really devastated and had to go down to the lake to try to, console himself. And the rest of the Green team, the rest of the Green Senior Cs, took it upon themselves to take over for him and go down and console him. That was one of the most impressive things I think I've ever seen 15-year-olds do in my entire life. And I don't think I'll ever see a group of 15-year-olds act so maturely and do such a nice thing for one of their friends who was going through a tough moment, who had really poured his heart out and done such a nice thing.
Yeah, I was there for that moment. I had gone down to the lake because I was worried about Ollie, and I was talking to him for a while, and he was pretty inconsolable, and, nothing I said mattered because, I was an adult and he didn't care. But seeing the whole rest of the age group kind of come down and show him that, like, no one thought any less of him as a person or a captain because Green happened to have fewer points than Gray at the end of the day. It was a pretty special moment. Wehmeyer, last word here. I mean, is there another moment you can recall? I mean, I feel like we got to ask, Wehmeyer versus Xander 2018. And then we'll end it. What was that like? I mean, you pretty much had the two people that the entirety of camp wanted to be captain more than anybody in the whole camp, and happened to be two of the closest friends in the entire camp. So what was that experience like for you guys? Quickly.
Oh man, first I think that I campaigned hard for a Gerson Cohen captainship that year, and I think we had a bid going. It got shot down, but we had a bid going. Should have started a petition, but. Man, for me, 2018 was so much fun. And part of it was definitely that, I had been captain prior, so I knew what to expect. And so I felt like I could do my job better. But a huge piece of that was that, Xander was captain for Gray. And, so much of my experience over those 4 days was, being with him, at the volleyball court, at one inning softball, at the basketball games. And it's just one of those things where Green and Gray is so much more fun if you've got somebody on the other side of the aisle that you just don't want to lose to. I just, every ounce of my being doesn't want to lose anything to Xander. So it was almost every point mattered that much more to me, because it was it didn't matter if it was a soft track and field meet. It was I don't want to give him that point. And then at the end of that, too, you're just that's what makes the whole thing beautiful. Because it's Xander is the person that brings the best performance I can possibly do out of me. And I cannot do what I do without that kind of motivation. And so I can't be the kind of captain that I want to be in any moment without the motivation that comes from the fact that he's the guy on the other side that is handing me losses on the volleyball court every game. It's that mentality is that for me is what's so cool about Green and Gray. I just love the fight. I love the hunt. And so for me, that was super, super special. I was very, very appreciative that I had the opportunity for that.
Xander, how about you, man? Being on the losing side of it.
Yeah. I've beaten Zach in so much.
So much.
I beat Zach. They're uncashed checks to prove it. I beat Zach so constantly. I was pretty confident that I was going to win that year. But hands down, if there's anyone I have to lose to, it would be Zach Wehmeyer, one of my closest friends at camp, one of my closest friends ever. A great leader and a really great guy. So it was tough. It was tough to lose, but if there's anyone I would like to lose to, I would never lose to Cohen or Raul, but if I had to lose to Wehmeyer, it happens.
Yeah, and I think that's a pretty good place to end. Zach, thank you so much for coming on the show. This is a lot of fun, man.
Hey, man, thank you guys so much for having me. You're doing an awesome thing here. It's definitely always the best part of my week, and so I appreciate the effort that goes into making this, and shout out to Rick for all the production value. Now that I've seen behind the scenes, I can see how he really carries the team, and I got a lot of love for Rick K for that as well. But thank you guys for what you're doing, and thanks for having me on.
Always a pleasure catching up with you, my man. All right, I think now we're ready for everybody's favorite segment of the show, the Xander Furman Top 10 of the Week. What do you got for us this week, Xander?
Just real quick before I get into this, did we really have Zach Wehmeyer on, or did we have a bot record 10,000 hours of Zach Wehmeyer conversations and have it record what Zach Wehmeyer probably would say in this situation? Anyway, let's get into the top 10. Top 10 things most likely to be overheard during a Green and Gray speech. We had a captain conversation. Figured captain speeches should be the top 10. Let's start it off with number 10. Number 10, all right, boys. Number 9, today is our day. Number 8, it doesn't matter what the score is. Number 7, Timmy, stand up. Timmy won his match yesterday against Roger Federer. Number 6, I see the fire in all of your eyes. Number 5, we have it. Number 4, they don't have it. Number 3, every 50-50 ball. Number 2, and I guarantee we will be ringing that bell. And the number 1 most likely thing to be overheard during a Green and Gray speech is G-R.
Unbelievable, as always. The Xander Furman top 10 of the week. Wow, that, as always, was a lot of fun. Thank you so much, again, Zach Wehmeyer, for coming on the show and hanging out with us. Inspirational, even when he doesn't mean to be. And again, guys, we want to hear from you. We want to know if there are captains you remember that were kind of inspirational and legendary in your time at camp. If you happen to be lucky enough, like we were, to be captain, what was that experience like for you? We want all of it. Hit us up, inbetweentimeBLC@gmail.com. Raul, words of wisdom this week, my man.
Yeah, guys, remember, if a tree falls in the forest, it definitely makes a sound. Stop being so narcissistic. The forest doesn't revolve around you.
And from the 3 most narcissistic people on planet Earth, prime time is over. You missed your chance to shower, and you cannot get water from the health center. Get in your bunks, and we'll see you next time on the In Between Time podcast.
I'm in senior camp.